Chapter 1. The Night She Shot the Moon-Eyed Beast. Blackthorn Mountains didn't forgive mistakes. Elara Kane had learned that the hard way long before she ever pulled the trigger. Rain lashed the pine forest sideways, turning the narrow logging road into a river of red mud. Her grandfather's old Ford coughed and shuddered, headlights carving tunnels through the storm as she pushed it higher into the wilderness. 27 years old, 3,000 miles from the city that had chewed her up and spat her out. And still the past clung to her skin like damp smoke. She was done running, she told herself. This cabin half-rotted, mouse-infested, and mercifully off-grid was the last place anyone would ever look for Elara Kane. Disgraced trauma surgeon, tabloid villain, widow in all but name. Lightning cracked the sky open, illuminating the jagged ridge ahead. For a heartbeat, the entire forest glowed silver. And in that frozen moment, she saw it, a shape on the road, too big for a bear. To deliberate for anything natural. She slammed the brakes. Tires skidded. The truck fishtailed and died with a wet gasp. The thing didn't move. Elara's pulse hammered in her throat. She reached across the seat for the rifle she hadn't touched since she was 16, her grandfather's Winchester. Oiled and loaded because old men in these mountains believed in being ready. She cracked the door, rain instantly soaking her hoodie, and stepped out into the storm. 20 yards ahead, the creature stood broadside in the headlights, taller than any wolf had a right to be. Sleek black fur plastered to muscle that rolled like living iron. Steam rose from its body in the cold downpour. And its eyes, God, those eyes burned molten gold, reflecting the lightning like twin full moons. It watched her the way a predator watches something it has already decided to kill. Elara raised the rifle. Rain streamed off the barrel. "Back off," she shouted, voice cracking. "I swear I will put you down." The wolf lowered its massive head, lips peeling from teeth longer than her fingers. A growl rolled out of it, so low the ground itself seemed to tremble. Then it took one deliberate step forward. She fired. The shot exploded through the storm. Muzzle flash blinding. The wolf staggered, a spray of blood blackened the headlights, but it didn't fall. It lunged. Elara screamed, stumbled backward, heel slipping in mud. The rifle's second shot went wild into the trees. Then the beast was on her now. Past her, barreling into the darkness beyond the road as suddenly as it had appeared. A final snarl, fading into the roar of the rain, and silence. She stood shaking, ears ringing, the smell of gunpowder and wet iron thick in her nose. Blood spattered the hood of the truck, too much blood for a graze. She had hit its center mass. Nothing survived that. Yet the forest felt emptier now, as though something ancient had just slipped its leash and vanished. Elara didn't remember climbing back into the truck or coaxing the engine to life. She only remembered the drive up the last switchback, white-knuckled, checking the rearview mirror every 3 seconds for glowing eyes that never reappeared. By the time she killed the engine in front of the cabin, her teeth were chattering so hard her jaw ached. She left the rifle on the seat stupid, reckless, and ran through the downpour to the porch. The key stuck in the swollen door the way it always did. She shouldered it open, slammed it behind her, and slid every bolt her grandfather had ever installed. Only then did she let herself slide down the door to the floor, knees to chest, soaked and shaking. Outside, thunder rolled like something laughing. She told herself it was just a wolf, a freakishly large, rabid wolf. Nothing more. But when she finally peeled off her hoodie hours later, she found a single black hair course, longer than any dog's, clinging to the fabric at her throat. It shimmered faintly, even in the dim lamplight, threaded with silver that caught the glow like moonlight trapped under fur. Elara stared at it for a long time. Then she burned it in the fireplace and watched the flames turn briefly, impossibly blue. She didn't sleep that night. She sat in the old rocking chair with the rifle across her lap, listening to the storm argue with the mountains. At some point, the rain softened to sleet, ticking against the tin roof like impatient claws. Just before dawn, a new sound rose beneath the window low, pained whine from the port. Not quite animal, Not quite human. Elara's finger tightened on the trigger. The whine came again, weaker, followed by the heavy thud of something collapsing against her door. She rose slowly, heart battering her ribs, and approached the frost-rimed window. Through the glass, half hidden in shadow and swirling snow, a massive black wolf lay bleeding on her welcome mat. Its golden eyes found hers across the darkness. And this time, it didn't run. Chapter 2. The man who should have died Elara's hand froze on the deadbolt. The wolf now. The man knelt naked on her porch, one palm braced against the doorframe, the other clamped over the bullet wound in his side. Blood seeped between his fingers in slow, deliberate pulses, black in the porch light. Rainwater streamed down the hard planes of his chest, cutting pale channels through the grime and gore. His breath came in shallow, ragged pulls, fogging the air between them. "Don't," he repeated, voice cracked and raw. "Don't scream, please." The plea hit her like a slap. Men didn't beg her for anything anymore. Not since the courtroom. Not since the headlines. Not since the night she came home to an empty apartment. And a note that read, "I can't watch. You save everyone, but us." She unlatched the chain, with fingers that felt borrowed from someone steadier. He sagged as the door opened, shoulder taking his weight against the jamb. Up close he was enormous, 6'4", maybe 6'5", broad through the chest. Every muscle carved like he'd been forged instead of born. A lattice of old scars crossed his ribs, pale against bronze skin. His hair, black and thick, clung to sharp cheekbones and a jaw that looked capable of biting through bone. Elara's medical training kicked in before her fear could. Shock. Hypothermia setting in. Blood loss severe. "Stay there," she ordered, voice steadier than she felt. She disappeared inside. Came back with the thickest quilt she owned and the battered trauma kit she still couldn't bring herself to throw away. He watched her with those impossible eyes, gold-ringed and bruised, violet, never blinking even when lightning forked overhead. "I'm going to touch you," she warned, a humorless huff. "Lady, you already shot me. Touch away." She knelt, ignoring the sleet soaking her knees, and pressed folded gauze hard against the wound. He hissed but didn't pull away. The entry was high on the left flank, just under the ribs, through and through. Thank God. No bullet to dig for. The edges were already knitting, pink and angry, like time-lapse footage of healing. She'd seen battlefield wounds close slower than this. "What the hell are you?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. He closed his eyes. Something that should have stayed in the trees tonight. His skin burned under her palms, fever hot despite the cold. She draped the quilt around his shoulders and tried to lever him upright. He weighed a ton, all dense muscle and stubborn pride, but he let her take some of his weight. Together they stumbled over the threshold. The second the door shut behind them, the storm's roar muted to a dull throb. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and coffee, and now blood. He leaned against the wall beside the fireplace, head tipped back, throat working as he fought for breath. Elara shoved the coffee table aside and spread another quilt on the rug. Down. Now. He obeyed, folding long legs beneath him with a grimace. The movement tore the wound open again. Fresh blood welled. She cursed under her breath and cracked open the trauma kit. "Name," she said while threading a suture needle she probably wouldn't need. "I'm not stitching up a stranger." A pause. Rain hammered the tin roof like thrown gravel. "Rowan," he said at last. "Rowan Blackthorn." Of course. The mountains shared his surname. Half the ridges and hollows were named for some long-dead Blackthorn who'd run moonshine, or fought revenuers, or both. She'd thought it coincidence. "Elara Kane," she answered automatically, then regretted it. Names were power. Names could be searched. Rowan's eyes opened a slit. "I know who you are, Doc." The words landed cold. She'd been recognized exactly twice since fleeing Seattle, once by a gas station clerk who'd stared too long, once by a hiker who'd whispered "baby killer" as she passed. Both times she'd wanted to vanish into the ground, Rowan's gaze held no judgment, only exhaustion and something uncomfortably like understanding. I read the transcripts, he said quietly. Not the headlines. The actual testimony. You did everything right that night. Elara's hand stilled over the antiseptic. The room shrank until there was only the crackle of the fire and the thud of her own heart. Don't, she whispered. I won't lie to you. His voice was soft, almost tender. Not tonight. She swabbed the wound harder than necessary. He didn't flinch. The bleeding had already slowed to an ooze. By the time she'd cleaned and packed it, the edges looked days old instead of minutes. She sat back on her heels, hands blood slick, and stared. You're healing, she said flatly. Impossibly fast. Rowan's mouth twisted. Family trait. That's not. She stopped. Noticed the tremor in his arms, the sweat beating at his temples despite the fever. You're still crashing. Adrenaline's wearing off. I'll live. He tried to push up on an elbow, swayed. Just need a minute. You'll have a minute horizontal, or I'll knock you out myself. She pressed him back down with a palm to the sternum. His heart thundered beneath her hands too fast, too strong. When did you last eat? A humorless laugh. Before I decided to play highway chicken with a surgeon who shoots like a Marine. Elara stood, wiped her hands on a towel, and moved to the kitchen on autopilot. Venison stew from 2 nights ago. Still good. She heated it in silence while he watched her with the stillness of something that didn't need to blink often. She brought him a bowl and a spoon. He took them but didn't eat, just stared into the steaming broth like it might bite. I can't stay here, he said finally. You're not going anywhere until that hole closes. They'll smell the blood if they find me here. Who's they? She crouched again, close enough to see the flecks of silver in his irises, like stars caught in amber. Rowan, talk to me. He closed his eyes. You ever believe in things that go bump in the night? Elara Kane? I stopped believing in anything the night my husband put a gun to his own head. The words tasted like rust. She hadn't meant to say them. Rowan's gaze snapped to hers, sharp with something that might have been grief. Then I'm sorry, he said, because the things that go bump just knocked on your door, and one of them is bleeding on your grandmother's quilt. Thunder rolled closer now, and the fire guttered as if the storm itself had breathed on it. Rowan set the untouched bowl aside. Lock the doors. Bar them. If anyone comes through that isn't me, shoot first. You are currently the only thing I've shot tonight. A faint, exhausted smile. Give it time. He laid his head back on the quilt, lashes dark against his cheekbones. Within minutes, his breathing evened out, deep and slow. Elara watched the rise and fall of his chest, the way the firelight painted gold across the ridges of old scars. She should be terrified. She should drag him back into the storm and pretend this night never happened. Instead, she found herself pulling the quilt higher over his shoulders, fingers brushing the black hair from his brow. His skin still burned. Outside, something held long, mournful, too close to the cabin. Rowan's eyes opened instantly, glowing bright in the dark. They found the blood trail, he whispered. Elara reached for the rifle. Chapter 3. Things that howl back hell came again, closer. Threading through the sleet like a silver needle dot, it was answered by another, deeper. From the ridge behind the cabin, a third voice rose from the east, 3 wolves circling, tightening the noose. Rowan was on his feet before Elara finished chambering around. The quilt slid from his shoulders. The wound in his side had scabbed over with a thick, angry ridge that looked weeks old. He swayed once, caught himself on the back of the rocking chair, and fixed her with a stare that made the room feel suddenly too small. Silver loads? He asked. She blinked. Grandpa kept a box for problem bears. Get them. Elara tore open the ancient ammo tin on the mantel. The cartridges inside gleamed dull gray hand-loaded silver slugs. Her grandfather had sworn were for folklore, not wildlife. She'd always rolled her eyes. Now her hands shook as she fed 5 into the Winchester. Rowan watched the windows, head tilted as if listening to a conversation only he could hear. The firelight carved harsh shadows across the scars on his back claw marks, old and pale, layered like topographic lines on a brutal map. "They're not here for me," he said quietly. "They're here for what I did tonight." Which was, crossed a line I wasn't supposed to cross. His gaze flicked to her, something raw and almost apologetic in it. "I kept you alive on that road. That makes you a loose end." Another howl, so close the window panes rattled. The temperature in the room plummeted. Frost spiderwebbed across the inside of the glass. Elara's voice came out steadier than she felt. "Then they have to go through me." Rowan's mouth curved, not quite a smile, more the ghost of one. Brave woman. Stupid, but brave. He moved to the door, bare feet silent on the boards, and pressed his palm flat against the wood. His eyes closed. For a moment, the only sound was the storm and the frantic thud of her heart. "They're shifting," he murmured. 2 minutes, maybe less. Shifting. She tasted the word like spoiled milk. "As in, what you did on my porch." "Yes." He turned to her then, and the weight in his stare pinned her in place. "Elara, when that door opens, you will see things that can't be unseen. You can still leave. Take the truck. Drive south until the storm breaks. I'll buy you the time." She thought of the empty apartment waiting in Seattle, the unread messages from reporters, the bottle of oxycodone in her glove box she hadn't touched in 6 weeks. Then she looked at the half-healed hole in his side and the way his hands shook, not from fear, but from the effort of holding something enormous back. "I'm exactly where I want to be," she said. Rowan studied her for a long heartbeat. Something shifted behind his eyes, ancient and exhausted and wondering. "Then stand behind me," he said, "and whatever you do, don't run." Prey runs. He didn't wait for an answer. The change rolled through him like dark water. It was faster this time, violent in its grace. Shoulders broadened, spine arched, skin splitting along the seams of old scars to reveal thick black fur beneath. His face elongated with a wet crunch that made her stomach lurch. But she didn't look away. When it was done, the wolf filled half her living room, massive, silver-tipped, eyes glowing that impossible gold. He turned his head and nudged her once, gently, with the muzzle still wet with rain. Then the door exploded inward. Splinters showered the room. A second wolf, smaller, gray, lips peeled in a silent snarl, leapt through the breach. Rowan met it midair. The impact shook the floorboards. The 2 beasts crashed into the kitchen table and reduced it to kindling. Teeth flashed. Blood sprayed dark on Rowan's coat, brighter on the intruders. Elara brought the rifle up, but there was no clear shot. They moved too fast. A blur of fury and muscle. Another shape filled the doorway, human this time. Male, bare-chested despite the cold, skin inked with spiraling runes that glowed faint blue. His eyes were the same yellow as Rowan's, but colder, crueler. "Enough," he barked. Rowan disengaged with a rip of fur and flesh, leaving the gray wolf whimpering on the floorboards. He planted himself between Elara and the newcomer, hackles raised, a growl rolling out of him that vibrated in her bones. The man in the doorway smiled like winter. "You reek of human, Blackthorn. The council will love this." Rowan shifted back, mid-growl, bones cracking, fur receding until he stood naked and bleeding again. Chest heaving. "Get out." "Caius." Not without the woman. Caius's gaze slid to Elara, nostrils flaring as if scenting her fear. "She saw. She shot. She dies. Law is law. She's under my protection." Rowan's voice carried something older than anger, authority that made the air thicken. Caius laughed. "You have no pack left to enforce it. Exile." The word hit Rowan like a slap. His shoulders tensed. The scab on his side split and bled anew. Elara stepped forward before she could think better of it. The rifle rose level with Caius's chest. "Next word out of your mouth determines whether you leave upright or in a bag," she said. Caius's eyes narrowed. "You die for him, little human." I've died for less, she answered and meant it. Silence stretched, broken only by the gray wolf's whining and the crackle of the fire. Caius inhaled, slow and deliberate, and his expression shifted surprise. Then something darker. Hunger, maybe. Recognition. Moonbound, he whispered, almost reverent. She carries your mark already. Rowan went unnaturally still. Elara felt it, then a tug low in her belly, like a hook behind her navel. The same pull she'd felt on the road when gold eyes met hers through the rain. Her pulse stuttered. Caius's smile returned, sharp as broken glass. Oh, Rowan, you poor bastard. You didn't just save her. You claimed her. He stepped back into the storm, melting into shadows that swallowed him whole. 48 hours, his voice drifted back. Bring her to the circle, or we come for both of you. The doorway stood empty, wind howling through it like a mourning woman. Rowan didn't move. Blood dripped from his fingertips onto the ruined floor. Elara lowered the rifle slowly. Her voice came out small. What did he mean? Claimed. Rowan turned to her, and for the first time since he'd collapsed on her porch, he looked afraid. It means, he said, voice raw, that somewhere between the moment you pulled that trigger and the moment you dragged me inside, fate decided you're mine. He took one step toward her, then another, until she could feel the heat radiating off his skin. And I think, he whispered, I've been yours a lot longer than tonight. Outside, the storm finally broke, and the mountains held their breath. Chapter 4. The mark she couldn't see. The cabin felt smaller after Caius left, as though the walls had crept inward while no one was looking. Wind moaned through the broken door, carrying shards of ice that hissed against the dying fire. Elara stood rooted, rifle hanging loose in her hands, staring at the man who had just torn her world open twice in one night. Rowan's chest rose and fell to fast. Blood traced the ridges of his abdomen and dripped from the tips of his fingers. Yet he didn't seem to notice. His eyes human again, but still that impossible gold were fixed on her like she was the only solid thing left in the room. Say something, he rasped. Lara swallowed. The words felt thick. You said claimed like it's a death sentence. It can be. He took a careful step forward, then stopped when she tensed. But not the way you think. She set the rifle against the wall slow. Deliberate, then crossed to the hearth and threw to more logs on the embers. Sparks flared. She needed the light. Needed to see his face when he lied, or when he told the truth. She wasn't sure which would be worse. Explain, she said to the flames. From the beginning. No more riddles. Rowan exhaled through his teeth. He moved like someone expecting pain with every motion. Lowered himself onto the stone hearth opposite her. The fire painted harsh shadows across the scars on his chest, turning them into canyons. I'm Lycan, he began. Born, not bitten. My bloodline goes back to the first wolves that walked these mountains with the old tribes. We call ourselves the Blackthorn Pack, called past tense. His mouth twisted. There aren't many of us left. Elara hugged her knees to her chest. The quilt he'd bled on lay in a heap. She could smell iron and wet dog and something wilder underneath. Caius said exile. Rowan's gaze dropped to the flames. 5 years ago, I killed the wrong wolf. My brother. The confession came out flat, stripped of drama, which somehow made it worse. He challenged our father for alphaship. I stepped between them. One moment of lost control, and he flexed his right hand. The knuckles were split, though the cuts were already closing. Pack law is absolute. Blood for blood. They took my name, my place, my future. I've been running the ridges ever since. The fire popped. A coal rolled out. She nudged it back with the poker. And tonight? She asked. Tonight I was tracking Caius's scouts. They've been hunting humans along the border roads, breaking the accords. I got careless. Wandered into your headlights. He looked at her then, something raw in his eyes. You should have driven away, Elara. I don't leave people bleeding in the road. Her voice cracked on the last word. Memories of gurneys and fluorescent lights. and a flat line that never stopped screaming crowded her throat. Rowan heard it anyway. I know, he said softly. Silence stretched, fragile as frost. She forced herself to ask the question burning under her ribs. What does moonbound mean? He rubbed a hand over his face. Old magic. Older than Pax. Older than language. When a Lycan meets the soul the moon forged for them, the bond snaps into place. Irreversible. Undeniable? His laugh was bitter. Usually it happens inside the pack. Ranged. Controlled. Never with a human. And never. He gestured at the ruin of the door. The blood on the floor. Never like this. Elara felt that tug again. Deeper now. A silver thread pulling behind her sternum straight toward him. She pressed her palm there as if she could push it back inside. I don't feel different, she lied. Rowan's eyes softened. You will. Dreams first. Then the need. Then the hunger. He looked away. I'm sorry. Sorry. The word scraped her raw. She had heard it too many times from hospital administrators, from her husband's parents, from the mirror. She stood abruptly. You're still bleeding. He glanced down as if surprised to find himself wounded. It'll hold. Not on my watch. She crossed the room, knelt in front of him, and began peeling away the soaked gauze with clinical efficiency. He let her. His skin radiated heat like sun-warmed stone. Up close she could see the faint shimmer beneath his skin, like moonlight trapped under flesh. When her fingers brushed the edge of the scab, he inhaled sharply. Does it hurt? She asked. Only when you're gentle. He murmured. The words hung between them, heavier than they should have been. She felt his gaze on her bent head, on the loose strands of hair escaping her braid, on the pulse beating too fast at her throat. She sat back on her heels. There, it's closed. The wound was now a thin pink line, angry but sealed. You heal like something out of a fairy tale. Fairy tales end badly for the wolves, he said. Not all of them. Their eyes met. The fire crackled. Somewhere far off, thunder rumbled like distant warning. Rowan reached out slow, telegraphing every inch, and brushed a knuckle beneath her chin, tipping her face up. His thumb hovered over the faint bruise blooming, where the rifle stock had kissed her shoulder earlier. I can leave before dawn, he said quietly. Break the bond before it roots too deep. You'll feel sick for a week, maybe 2. Then it fades. You'll be free. Elara's heart stuttered. The thought of him walking out that door, of never feeling that strange silver pull again, hit her like a physical blow. And you? She asked. What happens to you? He dropped his hand. Exile's lonely. I'm used to it. She studied the shadows under his eyes, the new tension in his jaw, the way his fingers curled as if fighting not to reach for her again. No, she said. Rowan went very still. I'm tired of letting people disappear on me. Her voice shook, but she didn't look away. You stay until we figure out what the hell this is. Then we decide together. For a moment, he simply stared, something ancient and wondering moving behind his eyes. Then, carefully, as if she were made of spun glass, he lifted her hand and pressed his lips to the inside of her wrist right over the vein. That jumped for him. The contact sparked through her like lit gasoline. She felt it echo in his chest, saw his pupils blow wide. Together, he echoed, voice rough, outside. The sleet turned back to snow, soft and deliberate, covering the blood trails that led to her door. Inside, the fire settled into steady flame, and neither of them moved to bank it. Much later, when the cabin finally grew quiet except for the wind and the soft hush of falling snow, Elara woke in the rocking chair to find a heavy wool blanket tucked around her, and Rowan sitting on the floor beside her, back against the chair, head resting inches from her knee. He was asleep, or pretending to be. She reached down and let her fingers settle lightly in his hair. He leaned into the touch without waking, a low sound, almost a contented growl rumbling in his throat. And for the first time in years, Elara didn't dream of gunshots and flatlines. She dreamed of gold eyes watching her through the dark, and the feeling terrifying. Impossible that she was no longer running alone. Chapter 5. The weight of To Heartbeat's dawn came in bruised shades of violet and ash, sneaking through the broken door and painting frost across the floorboards. Elara woke stiff-necked in the rocking chair, blanket tucked tight around her shoulders, the faint scent of pine and warm male skin clinging to the wool. Rowan was gone from his place at her feet. For one terrifying second, she thought he'd kept his promise to leave. Then she heard the rhythmic thud of an axe outside. She rose, joints protesting, and pulled on her boots. The cabin looked like a war-zone splintered table, blood-smeared quilt, door hanging crooked on one hinge. She stepped over the wreckage and out onto the porch. Rowan stood shirtless in the snow, splitting firewood with a violence that looked personal. Each swing of the axe drove the blade clean through the log, wood exploding into perfect halves. His breath plumed white in the frigid air, muscles rolling under scarred skin, black hair tied back with a strip of leather torn from somewhere. The wound on his side was now only a thin silver line, barely visible. He sensed her immediately. The axe paused mid-arc. "Morning," he said, voice gravel rough from disuse. "You're going to freeze." She answered. He glanced down at himself as if temperature were optional. "Cold doesn't bother us much, us." The words settled between them like a living thing. Elara hugged her arms to her chest. "You fixed the doorframe." "Best I could without nails." He nodded toward a neat stack of boards leaning against the wall salvaged from the ruined table. "I'll ride into town later. Get hinges. Lumber. Whatever you need." "I have a door," she said softly. "I don't have answers." Rowan set the axe head into the chopping block and faced her fully. Snowflakes caught in his lashes. "Ask," he said. "Anything." She stepped off the porch. The snow soaked her jeans to the knee, but she barely felt it. Caius said 48 hours. That clock started last night. What happens when it runs out? Rowan's jaw flexed. "The circle convenes under the new moon. They'll demand I bring you before the council. If I refuse, they declare open hunt on both of us. And if you do bring me, they'll test the bond." His voice dropped. "Old way. Blood and pain. They'll try to break you to prove a human can't carry a Lycan mate mark." Elara felt the thread inside her tighten, almost painfully. "And if it doesn't break?" Rowan's eyes darkened. "Then the mark is accepted. You become pack. Protected. Mine." The last word came out rough, possessive, immediately followed by regret. "I'm sorry." That sounded honest. She finished. "I asked for honesty." Silence stretched, broken only by the soft creak of snow-laden branches. She took another step until they stood toe-to-toe, close enough to see the faint tremor in his hands. "Show me," she said. He frowned. "Show you what?" "The mark. Caius said I carry it. I want to see." Rowan hesitated, then lifted her left hand, the one he'd kissed in the night, and turned it palm up. With his thumb, he traced a spot just below the heel of her hand. Nothing visible. But when his skin met hers, warmth bloomed, spreading up her arm like spilled honey. "You won't see it with eyes," he murmured. "Only with touch. Only with me." He pressed harder. The warmth became heat, then a pulse steady, insistent, perfectly synchronized with his own heartbeat. She felt it echo in her wrist, her chest, low in her belly. Two rhythms braided into one. Elara's breath caught. She yanked her hand back, but the echo lingered. "That's inside me now. Since the moment you chose to drag me through that door instead of letting me bleed out," he said. "The bond doesn't care about permission, only choice." She stared at her palm as if it belonged to a stranger. Rowan watched her carefully. "Still want me to leave?" The question hung in the crystalline air. Elara thought of every time she'd been left by her mother at 12, by colleagues who turned their backs after the scandal, by Daniel's ghost the night he chose the gun over her. She was so tired of empty spaces shaped like people. "No," she said. The word came out fierce. "But I need rules, Rowan. I need truth. All of it. No protecting me from the ugly parts. Something fractured in his expression. Relief, maybe. Or surrender. Truth, he echoed. Then start with this. I've been alone so long I forgot what it felt like to want tomorrow. You make me remember. And it scares the hell out of me. The confession hung between them, raw and trembling. Elara reached up slowly and laid her palm over the thin scar on his ribs, the one she'd stitched in. Another lifetime last night? I'm scared too, she whispered. But I'm done running from things that scare me. Rowan's hand came up to cover hers, trapping it against his heart. Under her palm, his pulse stumbled, then steadied, matching hers again. Snow began to fall harder. Fat, silent flakes that caught in her hair and melted on his bare shoulders. He leaned down until their foreheads touched. His breath warmed her lips. I will burn the world before I let them hurt you, he said against her skin. That's the first truth. And the second? I don't know how to be gentle with something this fragile. His voice cracked. I destroy what I love, Elara. I always have. She felt the tremor in his frame. The old guilt riding him like a second skin. Then we learn together, she said. Starting now. She rose on tiptoe and pressed her lips to the corner of his mouth, barely a kiss. More a promise. He went rigid, every muscle locking, as if gentleness itself might shatter him. When she pulled back, his eyes were molten. Elara. Whatever he'd been about to say was cut off by a low, mechanical growl from the valley below. A truck engine coming up the switchback road. Rowan's head snapped toward the sound. His nostrils flared. Human, he said, tension leaking from him. One, male. Smells like coffee and motor oil. Elara's stomach dropped. Only one person knows I'm up here. Sheriff Whitaker. He checks on the cabin every couple weeks. Rowan stepped in front of her instinctively. Does he know about last night? I didn't call it in. She swallowed. But if he sees the door, then we give him a story he can live with. Rowan's voice hardened into something commanding. Go inside. Put on coffee. Act like you spent the night terrified of a bear. I'll handle the rest. She started to argue. But the look he gave her stopped the words in her throat. Pure alpha, ancient and unyielding. Trust me, he said softer. She did. God help her. She did. As she turned toward the ruined door. His hand brushed her wrist, one fleeting stroke over the invisible mark. The contact sent warmth spiraling through her again, steadying her more than any words could. Inside, she filled the percolator with shaking hands and listened to the truck grind closer. Outside, Rowan pulled on his blood-stiff jeans, rolled his shoulders once, and stepped into the falling snow like a man walking to war, wearing nothing but scars and secrets. And somewhere deep in the trees, something ancient watched them both and waited for night. Chapter 6. The Sheriff and the Lies We Tell. In daylight, Sheriff's cruiser rolled to a stop beside Elara's battered Ford, tires crunching through fresh powder. The engine died with a cough, and a moment later the door creaked open. Rowan was already moving. He stepped off the porch barefoot, jeans riding low on his hips, snowflakes melting against the heat of his skin. His posture had shifted, no longer the exhausted, bleeding man from last night, but something taller, broader, carved from the same stone as the mountains behind him. The axe rested casually across one shoulder like he'd been born holding it. Sheriff Whitaker climbed out slowly, hand resting near his holster out of habit rather than threat. He was 60 if he was a day, gray mustache bristling, eyes sharp under the brim of his Stetson. Morning, Miss Kane, he called, gaze flicking from the splintered doorframe to the shirtless giant in her yard. Looks like you had some trouble. Elara appeared in the doorway, coffee mug in hand, hair still tousled from sleep. She'd thrown on an old flannel that hung to mid-thigh and hoped it hid the bloodstains on her jeans. Black bear, she said, voice only trembling a little. Big one. Came right through the door, round 3 . I fired a couple shots, scared it off. Whitaker's gaze lingered on the destruction. Bear, ha. He scratched his jaw. Funny. Haven't had a break-in like that since '09. And you are? Rowan offered a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Rowan Blackthorn. I live up the ridge. Heard the shots. Came down to check. Figured a woman alone shouldn't have to swing an axe in this cold. He extended a hand. Whitaker took it. Elara watched the subtle flex of knuckles testing, measuring. Two predators deciding whether to bite. Whitaker's eyes narrowed. Blackthorn. Thought the family cleared out years back. Most did. Rowan's tone stayed easy, but steel lived underneath. I'm the stubborn branch. The sheriff studied him a moment longer, then turned back to Elara. You hurt. No, sir. She lifted the mug like a shield. Just rattled. Coffee? Whitaker waved it off. Came to tell you the county's closing the pass at noon. Storms circling back tonight could dump 3 feet. After that, you're stuck till spring thaw unless you got wings. Elara's stomach dipped. Trapped. With Rowan. With whatever was coming in 40 hours. Whitaker's gaze in the cruiser, then paused. Funny thing got a call from a hiker down near Miller's Gap. Said he saw a big black wolf the size of a damn horse limping along the road last night. Shot, he thought. You see anything like that? Rowan didn't flinch. Wolves don't get that big, Sheriff. Probably a bare silhouette in the lightning. Whitaker grunted. Maybe. He tipped his hat to Elara. You need anything. Radio don't work up here. But I'll have deputies swing by when the road reopens. Stay warm, Miss Kane. The cruiser backed down the drive. Taillights disappearing into the white. Only when the sound faded did Rowan's shoulders drop a fraction. Elara let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. You lied like you've done it before. Every day for 5 years. He turned to her. Expression unreadable. He'll dig. Small county. Long memories. Blackthorn name still means something ugly to some folks. She stepped closer. What did you do, Rowan? The brother you killed what really happened? His gaze shuddered. Not here. Not yet. The refusal stung, but she saw the cost of it in the tight line of his mouth. Inside. The cabin was warming again. Rowan rebuilt the fire with quick, angry movements while Elara scrubbed blood from the floorboards. They worked in silence until the worst of the mess was hidden beneath fresh quilts and strategically placed furniture. When the door was ray-hung crooked, but functional, Rowan stood back, hands on hips, staring at it like it had personally betrayed him. I need to scout the ridge, he said. Make sure Caius's wolves aren't closer than we think. You're not going alone. Elara, I have silver bullets and a worse temper than you right now. She met his stare. We're in this together. Remember? Something softened around his eyes. Stubborn woman. You have no idea. He disappeared into the bedroom and returned wearing one of her grandfather's old canvas coats. Too small across the shoulders. Sleeves ending halfway down his forearms. It made him look absurdly human, and her heart did a traitorous flip. They hiked the ridge behind the cabin under a sky the color of tarnished pewter. Snow fell in fat, lazy flakes. Rowan moved like he belonged to the forest, silent, tireless, pausing every few minutes to test the wind. Elara followed, lungs burning with cold. The invisible thread between them tugging tighter with every step. Near the tree line he stopped, crouched, brushed snow from a print the size of a dinner plate. Fresh, he murmured. Less than an hour. Elara's pulse spiked. Caius. Scout. They're watching. He glanced at her. They'll wait for night. Easier to move unseen. She swallowed. And then? Then we have a choice. He stood, snowflakes catching in his lashes. Run or stand. Elara looked back toward the cabin, a thin plume of smoke rising from the chimney. Her sanctuary. Her cage. I'm done running, she said. Rowan's eyes searched hers. Whatever he saw there made him nod once, slow and solemn. They started back down the slope. Halfway, he caught her wrist not rough, just enough to stop her. I need to tell you something, he said, voice low. Before tonight. Before choices get made that can't be undone. Elara's heart hammered. Tell me. He opened his mouth and froze. A new scent on the wind. copper and pine and something feral. Rowan's head snapped toward the tree line. His entire body went predator still. Inside, he growled. Now, they ran. The cabin door slammed behind them just as a howl rose close, triumphant, answered by 3 more voices weaving through the trees like smoke. Rowan barred the door with the heavy oak beam, then turned to her, eyes glowing that eerie gold. "Whatever happens tonight," he said, cupping her face in hands that trembled with restraint. "Know this, the bond didn't choose wrong. I'd burn for you, Elara Kane. I'd bleed. I'd break. Gladly." The first body hit the door hard enough to rattle the hinges. Rowan kissed her then quick, fierce, tasting of snow and desperation, and stepped back as the change tore through him. Fur exploded across his shoulders. Bones cracked and lengthened. In seconds, the massive black wolf stood between her and the door. Lips peeled in a snarl that promised death. Outside, the pack circled. Inside, Elara loaded the Winchester with silver, hands steady for the first time since Seattle, and somewhere deep in her chest, the invisible mark flared hot and bright like a second heart waking up to fight. Chapter 7. Blood on the Snow. Breath on the glass. First impact shook the entire cabin. The second splintered the new hinges Rowan had just hammered in place. The third never came. Silence fell, thick and deliberate, the kind that presses against the eardrums like deep water. Rowan's wolf stood rigid between Elara and the door, ears flat, every muscle carved in moonlight. Frost bloomed across the windows in frantic spirals, as if the cold itself feared what waited outside. Elara's pulse hammered so hard she tasted copper. She pressed her back to the kitchen counter, rifle raised. Silver loads glinting in the FIRELIGHT dot. Then came the voice, low, amused, drifting through the walls like smoke. "Little brother," Caius called, "sing song. Open the door. Let us see what you've chained yourself to." Rowan's answering growl rattled the coffee mugs in their cupboard. Elara's fingers tightened on the Winchester. "How many?" she whispered. Rowan shifted back just enough to speak, voice guttural, half human. "4, maybe 5. Caius brought his best. Another silence. Snow ticked against the tin roof like thrown gravel. A soft scrape at the window made them both spin. A woman's face appeared in the frost pale as moonlight, eyes the color of winter sky. She smiled, slow and sweet, and traced a claw along the glass. The sound set Elara's teeth on edge. "Rowan," the woman crooned, "you look thin. Exiled doesn't suit you." Rowan's entire frame vibrated with rage. "Mara, I should have known Caius kept you on his leash." Mara's smile sharpened. "Leash, collar, bed, call it what you like. He's alpha now. You're nothing." Her gaze slid past him to Elara. "And you brought dinner." Rowan lunged at the window, half shifted, claws raking the sill. Mara vanished in a swirl of snow. The assault came from every side at once. The door exploded inward. A gray brute barreled through, jaws gaping. Rowan met it head on, teeth sinking into throat with a wet crunch. They rolled across the floorboards in a blur of black and gray fur. At the same moment, the back window shattered. Cold and glass showered the quilt where Rowan had slept. A lean red wolf leapt through, eyes fixed on Elara. She fired. The silver slug took it high in the shoulder. The wolf screamed a sound to human and crashed into the table, sending chairs flying. Elara worked the lever, chambered another round, and put a second bullet through its skull. The body shimmered, shrank, became a naked man with red hair and sightless eyes. She didn't have time to be sick. Rowan was fighting to at once now, blood streaking his black coat. Caius circled the edges of the chaos, still human, still smiling, watching Rowan the way a butcher studies meat. Elara swung the rifle toward him. Caius lifted both hands, mock surrender. "Shoot me, little human. See how fast the bond drags your mate down with me." Rowan snarled, distracted for a fatal second. One of the wolves clamped jaws on his hind leg. Bone cracked. Rowan roared, twisted, tore free in a spray of blood. Elara's vision tunneled. The thread in her chest burned white-hot, agony and fury braided together. She felt Rowan's pain like it was her own. She lowered the rifle and charged. It was suicide, and she knew it, but the bond screamed louder than reason. She slammed the rifle but into the nearest wolf's temple, felt the impact shudder up her arms. The beast staggered. Rowan finished it with a slash of claws that opened its belly to the firelight. Only Caius remained standing amid the ruin. He tilted his head, studying her with something that might have been admiration. "You feel him," he said softly. "Every wound, every heartbeat. That's the curse of the moonbound, girl. You die when he does." Rowan limped forward, bleeding heavily, and planted himself between them again. His voice came out shredded. "Touch her, and I'll salt the earth with what's left of you." Caius laughed, still giving orders. "Exile, the circle gave you 48 hours. Dawn tomorrow is the deadline. Bring her willingly, or we drag you both in pieces." He stepped backward through the broken doorway and melted into the storm. The wind swallowed his footprints almost instantly. The cabin fell eerily quiet except for the wind and the wet sound of Rowan breathing. He collapsed then, shifting back to human as he fell. The leg wound was ugly shredded muscle, white bone glinting. Blood pooled beneath him to fast. Elara dropped to her knees, hands already moving. Tourniquet her belt. Pressure. Elevate. The trauma script ran through her head like a prayer. Rowan caught her wrist, fingers slick with his own blood. "Hey," he rasped. "Look at me." She did. His face was gray, lips bloodless, but his eyes burned gold and steady. "I'm not dying here," he said. "Not tonight. Not while you still need answers. You don't get to decide that," she snapped, voice cracking. Tears she hadn't given permission for spilled hot down her cheeks. "Damn you, Rowan, stay with me." He smiled small, crooked, heartbreaking. "Trying, Doc." She dragged him to the hearth, piled every blanket she owned beneath and around him. The fire roared back to life under her shaking hands. She found the old suture kit, whiskey, anything to staunch the bleeding. Rowan's head lolled against her thigh as she worked. His skin burned with fever. "Cold," he mumbled. "You're in shock." She pressed her forehead to his. "Stay awake. Tell me something true," he whispered. "Something only you know." Elara's hands stilled on the bandage. "I still sleep with the light on," she said, voice raw. "Because the night Daniel died, the apartment was dark when I came home. I found him by the sound the gun made when it hit the floor. I never want to be that blind again." Rowan's fingers found hers, squeezed once. "I sleep outside," he answered. "On the ground, because the first night after they cast me out, I couldn't stand walls. Still can't. Until last night. Your couch felt safe," she laughed, or maybe sobbed. The sound hurt either way. His eyes fluttered. "Elara, the bond. It's deeper now. Battleforged. If I die, you won't. You'll feel it rip you in half. Promise me, if it comes to that." "Run?" She kissed him then hard, desperate, tasting blood and snow and terror. He kissed her back like a drowning man takes air, fingers tangled in her hair, anchoring them both. When she pulled away, his eyes were clearer, fiercer. "Together," she said against his mouth. That was the deal. He nodded once, a promise sealed in blood. Outside, the storm quieted to a hush, as if the mountain itself leaned in to listen. Inside, Elara bound his wounds with hands that no longer shook, and Rowan watched her, with something ancient waking behind his eyes, something that looked a lot like hope. Dawn was still hours away, and the circle was waiting. Chapter 8. The hours before Serenderthe fires settled into steady coals, painting the ruined cabin in shifting amber. Rowan slept or pretended to curled on the quilts like a great wounded animal. Breath shallow, but even. Elara sat beside him, knees drawn up, rifle across her lap, counting heartbeats the way other people counted sheep. His, then hers. to rhythms braided so tightly she no longer knew where one ended and the other began. Every so often his leg twitched, a whimper escaping through clenched teeth. She laid her palm over the bandage and felt the fever burning under his skin. The bond carried the pain to her in dull, constant waves, but she welcomed it. Proof he was still fighting. Outside, the snow had stopped. The world lay silent and white, waiting. She must have dozed, because the next thing she knew, gray light was leaking through the broken windows and Rowan's hand was on her cheek, thumb brushing away a tear she didn't remember shedding. Morning. He rasped Dottie Lara jerked upright. You're awake. Barely. He tried to push up on an elbow, hissed, thought better of it. How bad? You lost a lake of blood and your femur looks like it went through a wood chipper. Bad enough. She touched the pulse in his throat stronger. But you're healing. Faster than last night. He gave a tired half smile. Battle does that. Adrenaline, bond, stubbornness. Pick one. She traced the new pink scar on his thigh, barely believing it was real. I pick you. Something fragile flickered across his face. He caught her hand, pressed it flat over his heart. Elara, there's something I didn't tell you. About the circle. About why they want you alive. Her stomach dropped. I'm listening. Rowan stared at the ceiling beams, jaw working. The Blackthorn alpha line is dying. Has been for generations. My father was the last pureblood who could still sire true heirs. When I killed my brother, I ended the direct line. The council needs new blood-strong blood. A moonbound human who survives the trials. He swallowed. They'll try to breed you. Force the bond to produce the next alpha. The words landed like stones in still water. Elara felt the walls tilt. You're saying they'll chain you to the strongest male who wins the right. Or try. His voice cracked on the last word. I'd rather die than let that happen. She stared at him. The fire. The blood-stained floorboards, everything suddenly sharp and surreal. And if we run? She asked quietly. They'll hunt us to the ends of the earth. Caius wants the throne. He'll never stop. Silence stretched, heavy as wet wool. Elara stood, walked to the window, pressed her forehead to the cold glass. The valley below was a blank page of snow. Somewhere out there, wolves waited for sunset. She thought of Cage's hospital corridors, courtrooms, the hollow apartment where grief still lived in the corners. She was so tired of Cage's. Rowan spoke behind her, voice raw. I'll go alone. Tell them the bond broke when I bled out. They'll believe it. You'll be free. She turned. He was trying to sit up again, sweat beading on his brow, determination carved into every line of his body. Stop, she said. He froze. She crossed the room in 3 strides and straddled his hips careful, mindful of the wounded leg until they were eye to eye. Look at me, she ordered. Gold met stormy gray. I have spent years letting other people decide what my life was worth, she said, voice shaking with fury and something fiercer. Doctors, judges, headlines, my own damn husband. I am done. She cupped his face, thumbs brushing the sharp bones of his cheeks. You are not a curse. Rowan Blackthorn, you are the first thing that has felt like choice in a very long time. His breath hitched. Actual tears glinted in his eyes. I'm poison, he whispered. Everything I touch is still breathing, she finished. I'm still breathing. And I choose you. Bond, trials, pack, exile, whatever comes. I choose you. She kissed him then, slow and deliberate, pouring every unspoken promise into it. He made a broken sound and kissed her back like she was the only solid thing in a collapsing world. When they parted, foreheads still touching, she felt the bond flare bright and steady between them, no longer a thread, but a rope forged of steel and fire. Together, she said. Together, he echoed, voice rough with wonder. Hours slipped away in quiet. Necessary things. She fed him broth he didn't want. He let her rebandage the leg without protest. They spoke in low voices about small truths, her favorite constellation Orion, because it was the only one her father taught her before he left. his lupus, the wolf, because it felt like mockery and home at once. They did not speak of sunset. Late afternoon found them on the porch, wrapped in the same quilt. Rowan leaned heavily on her shoulder, but he was standing. The sky bled gold and crimson behind the ridges. 1 hour, he said. Elara nodded against his neck. I know. He turned her to face him, hands framing her face. Whatever happens in that circle, remember this moment. Remember I would tear the moon out of the sky if it kept you safe. She smiled, small and fierce. Then let's go remind them the moon belongs to both of us now. Rowan kissed her once more soft. Reverend then stepped back. The shift rolled through him like dark water, painless this time, almost beautiful. The great black wolf stood before her, silver-tipped for catching the last light, eyes glowing with everything he couldn't say in words. Elara rested her brow against his for a heartbeat. Then she shouldered the rifle, slipped her hand into the thick ruff at his neck, and together they walked down the porch steps into the snow behind them. The cabin door hung open, firelight flickering across blood-stained floors like a hearth saying goodbye. Ahead, the forest waited silent, ancient, hungry. And somewhere in its heart, the circle opened and the wolves began to sing. Chapter 9. The circle beneath the hollow moon forest swallowed them whole. Snow fell upward in the wind's strange eddies, catching the last bruised light of day. Rowan moved ahead of her in wolf form, limping only slightly now, ears swiveling for threats. Every few minutes, he paused to press his great head against her hip, an unspoken check-in. A silent I'm still here. Elara kept her gloved hand buried in the thick fur at his neck, letting the bond guide her footsteps when the trail vanished under drifts. They descended into a ravine she had never known existed. Walls of stone and ice rising on either side until the sky narrowed to a pale scar overhead. The air grew heavier, thick with the scent of crushed pine and something metallic, cold blood baked into the rocks. At the bottom lay a perfect circle of standing stones. Black basalt shot through with quartz that caught the moonlight like frozen lightning. The new moon hung invisible above, but its pull was a physical weight on Elara's sternum, making the mark beneath her ribs throbbing. Time with Rowan's heart. Wolves waited in the shadows, dozens of them, eyes reflecting green and gold and hungry red. They parted as Rowan limped into the circle, forming a living ring of muscle and fang. Caius stood at the far edge, human and bare-chested despite the cold, arms spread like a priest welcoming penitents. Mara lounged at his left, red hair braided with bone beads, smile sharp as winter. In the center of the circle, an ancient woman waited, small, bent, wrapped in wolf pelts gone silver with age. Her eyes were milk-white, yet Elara felt them cut straight to her soul. Welcome, daughter of man, the crone rasped. I am Vera, voice of the circle. Step forward. Rowan growled, low and warning. Vera's blind gaze shifted to him. The exile will yield, or the exile will die where he stands. Elara felt the pack tense, ready to enforce the words. She squeezed Rowan's rough once steady, then stepped past him into the circle. The cold bit through her coat, but the bond burned hotter, anchoring her. I'm here, she said. Do your worst. Vera's mouth curved, almost kindly. Child, the worst is never what you expect. She lifted a gnarled hand. Two wolves dragged a figure forward, a boy, maybe 16, naked and shivering, wrists bound with silver chain that smoked against his skin. Elara's breath caught. The boy's eyes were the same gold as Rowan's. Rowan's entire body went rigid. Nephew, Caius purred. We found young Luca wandering too close to human roads. Thought he might enjoy the family reunion. Rowan shifted mid-stride for receding, bones snapping until he stood human and furious in the snow. Let him go, he snarled. He's a pup. This has nothing to do with him. Everything has to do with blood, Vera said softly. You ended the true line when you spilled your brothers. The pack weakens. The boy is the last of it unless new blood proves worthy. She turned her blind face toward Elara. The trial is simple, she intoned. The moonbound pair will face the gauntlet. Survive until the moon sets behind the western ridge, and the bond is sanctioned. Fail, she gestured to Luca. The boy dies. Then the woman. Then you, exile, piece by piece. Rowan's fists clenched until knuckles went white. Elara felt the bond scream rage, terror. Grief so intense her knees nearly buckled. How long? She asked. Vera smiled, showing too many teeth. 3 hours. Beginning now. The pack held as one a sound that cracked the night open. Caius stepped forward, shifting as he moved, amber wolf huge and scarred. Mara followed, red fur gleaming like fresh blood, for more wolves fanned out, cutting off every escape. Rowan turned to Elara, eyes wild. Run with me, he said, voice raw. Stay on my left, the legs still weak. Whatever happens, don't stop. She nodded once. He kissed her hard, desperate, tasting of snow and goodbye, and I love you even if I never said it, then spun away. The shift took him mid-turn, Black Wolf exploding into being Dot, and then they ran. The gauntlet was a nightmare of teeth and claws and silver-laced nets that burned where they touched. Rowan fought like a demon, taking wounds meant for her, bowling wolves aside with brute force and as. Here, Will. Elara fired the Winchester until it clicked empty, then used it as a club. Silver buttplate cracking skulls. Time fractured into moments of violence and breath and blood. And are in. Rowan staggered, leg finally giving out beneath him. Caius was on him instantly, jaws closing around his throat. Elara screamed rage, and terror braided into one sound and threw herself onto Caius's back. Knife from her boot sinking deep between his ribs. The amber wolf roared, flung her off. She hit the snow hard, air leaving her lungs in a rush. Rowan surged up, blood streaming from his neck, and met Caius head-on. They crashed together in a fury of fangs. Elara scrambled for the fallen rifle, hands numb, vision tunneling. That was when she saw Luca. The boy had slipped his chains somehow small. For his age, clever finger's hand was crawling toward the edge of the circle. Silver burns weeping on his wrists. Their eyes met across the chaos. Go, she mouthed. He hesitated, glanced at Rowan bleeding in the snow, then vanished between the stones. Something in Elara settled. One life, at least, would not end tonight. She turned back to the fight. Rowan had. Caius pinned, jaws locked on the softer fur beneath the jaw. But Mara was circling, waiting for an opening. Elara did the only thing she could think of. She stepped between them. Enough. The word tore out of her, amplified by something deeper than her own voice, by the bond, by fury, by love too fierce to name. The pack froze. Even Caius stilled beneath Rowan's teeth. Elara stood trembling in the center of the circle, blood in her mouth, knife in one hand, the other pressed to the mark burning over her heart. You want proof? She shouted into the silence. Here it is. She sliced her palm open without hesitation. Blood welled bright and hot. Then she walked straight to Rowan and pressed the wound to the deepest gash on his shoulder. Power exploded through them both. Light white and searing poured from the contact, racing along every vein, every scar, every thread of the bond. Rowan threw his head back and roared. The sound no longer wolf, but something older, something that made the standing stones tremble, and the pack fall to their knees. When the light faded, Rowan stood human again, wounds closed, eyes blazing like twin full moons. And on Elara's palm, glowing faintly against the blood, was a perfect crescent mark, silver and black. Unmistakable dot mate dash mark dot accepted. Sanctioned. Vera bowed her head, ancient and trembling. The moon has spoken. She whispered. Caius shifted back, chest heaving, hatred twisting his face. This changes nothing. He spat. Rowan stepped forward, voice ringing with authority that hadn't been his in 5 years. It changes everything. He looked at the pack at wolves who had once been family, now staring at him with something between fear and awe. Then he turned to Elara, took her bleeding hand, and laced their fingers together. He said simply. She squeezed once dot together dot above them. The new moon slipped behind the western ridge, and the circle fell silent.